Begin with the proposition. Once Mound stood complete by roughly 3500 BC. Around 2000 BC, Wade Dog was buried into one of its living surfaces. If that sequence is correct, the largest earthen monument north of Mexico is not a Mississippian creation. It is a monument already ancient when Mississippi and Cahokia arose separated from the current chronology by roughly 3,000 years. This film gives the archaic monument hypothesis its strongest possible form, and then asks what the data actually establish. Three kinds of evidence must not be blended. A radiocarbon determination dates the carbon in a sample. Stratigraphy orders deposits by physical position. Morphology compares shape and size with known collections. Regional dates can demonstrate that people lived across the American bottom. They do not automatically date monks. Mound. The question is therefore not whether archaic people were present. They were. The question is whether any archaic date is tied directly to mound construction, or to a primary burial that necessarily carries the mound surface with it. Yerkes regional record shows a populated and varied landscape. At Tep and McLean, people returned to bluff-top nut processing places. Bochart North held a tightly clustered occupation around the early 2nd millennium BC. Labr's Lake contained base camps and the oldest excavated structures on the American bottom. Missouri Pacific No. 2 and Range occupied the bluff base and interior margin. And the Cahokia Interpretive Center tracked place late archaic activity on the central floodplain itself. These were not isolated wanderers in an empty valley. They were communities using bluff, lake, wetland, and floodplain zones in different ways. The dates span a long sequence, Tep at about 3200 BC, McLean at 2650 and 2410, Cahokia at 2620, then 1260, 1190, and 1160, Bochart North between roughly 2160 and 2070, Labr's Lake from about 1510 into the 1st millennium BC in Missouri Pacific No. 2, down to about 590 BC. The distribution is real. It establishes formative populations around Cahokia long before the city. But the start of the Falling Springs phase at 3500 BC is a phase range, not a direct construction date for Monk's Mound. That distinction is the first hinge. A regional phase can supply context and precedent. It cannot by itself make the mound complete in 3500 BC. To formalize the claim, one needs a dated mound deposit, a construction surface sealed within the monument, or a primary feature whose relationship to the mound is physically unavoidable. The feature Vicky dog burial has been proposed as exactly that kind of feature. On the third terrace, a pit held an articulated dog, the bones still in anatomical connection. That matters. A whole body does not normally arrive mixed into a basket of borrowed soil. It was buried where it was found, with a red ochre in a small vessel. The pit originated from a living surface, cut through earlier features and was later covered by about 6/10 of a meter of additional construction and then a cap. If the dog is archaic, and if the pit belongs to that surface, then the surface must be at least as old as the burial. This is the strongest step in the older monument argument. In 1971, zooarchaeologist Paul Parmalee examined the animal. He called it small, judging from the tooth row and molars. He aged the individual as an adult, fairly mature, from wear on the lower carnassial. Then he wrote that its measurements fell within the range of William Hogg's archaic Kentucky and Alabama. Shell heap Hogg's based on those few measurements. This is important evidence, but it must be stated exactly. Parmalee age determined the animal biologically as an adult. He did not radiocarbon date it to be archaic. His archaeological comparison was a size overlap with the archaic reference series available to him. Archaic dog burial is a real and powerful precedent. Clause in summary, drawing on Warren's sample was 211 archaic dogs, 54 woodland dogs, and 10 Mississippian dogs. The practice was concentrated in archaic shell heaps, but it continued later. That means ritual dog burial supports an archaic possibility. It does not, by itself, fix a date. The diagnostic question is not simply whether a dog was buried, but which surface was cut, what lay below it, and what directly dated material remains in the bone. 3 direct dating attempts were later reported. The first produced a late archaic or early woodland outcome. The second run on the same sample produced a middle woodland outcome, roughly 2,000 years away. The second laboratory found too little carbon to obtain a date. The actual laboratory numbers, pretreatment data, collagen yields, and full reports were not published in the account now held. The 3 outcomes therefore do not form an archaic, woodland, and Mississippian series. 2 were discordant early results. The third failed. The Mississippian age comes from stratigraphy, not from a third radiocarbon determination. Here is the central conflict. The older monument model reads the dog as a primary burial into an already ancient mound surface. The published stratigraphic model places the pit at surface and 2 cutting features associated with the major structure. In Palisade, 3 hickory posts from that structure fall in an 11th to early 13th century range in Mississippian pottery. Lies on its floor. Beneath it are additional construction surfaces. Beneath the mound is a late woodland living surface. If those relationships are correct, the dog cannot be archaic. If the dog is archaic, then neither the provenience has been misread, the pit intrudes from another level, or the accepted sequence must be rebuilt. This is why one reliable new assay would have extraordinary consequences. Color is one of the most useful parts of this record, but only when color is separated into its causes. Red occurred in the dog burial is intentional material. Red, yellow, and brown play on the front ramp were deliberate finishes. Lighter and darker basket loaves in the mound record different source soils. Reddish stains in the cores are iron oxide features formed by soil chemistry, not evidence of fire. Black clay is an organic, water-retaining stratum associated with slumping. Vivionite, or lob, is a mineral formed under reducing phosphate-rich conditions. Color can record meaning, source, burning, oxidation, or water. It cannot be treated as one phenomenon. The front ramp was built in 3 stages and finished successively in red, then yellow, then brown. Plate with further caps at the head. The excavator interpreted the entrance as formal and ceremonial, rather than merely structural. Someone selected those materials, transported them, and placed them in a visible sequence at the approach to the summit. That is a meaningful act of building. Yet the field record names the colors without Munsell chips. A responsible reconstruction can show the sequence red, yellow, brown, but cannot claim exact hues, or assign a specific cosmology from color alone. Inside the mound, color works differently. And one west side boring basket loading appeared as breaks every 15 to 20 centimeters. The lighter 10 watt R4 over 2 loads contained large amounts of burnt clay. The darker 10Y R3 over 1 and 3 over 2 loads were much cleaner. The contrast demonstrates at least 2 source streams. One source included occupation debris-fired dog from buildings that had burned. The other carried less cultural material. The mound was not made from one anonymous soil. It was assembled from places with different histories. Other evidence identifies more source environments. Quillwort and spike rush point to soil taken from standing water, meander scars, or low wet ground. Pesod blocks preserved ancient turf. Uncarbonized seeds outnumbered carbonized seeds by nearly 13 to 1 in the tabulated feature samples, indicating rapid burial and sealing before decay. Maize, hickory, wild grape, and eastern agricultural complex plants show that people ate and worked around construction. The monument is therefore a map of the landscape turned vertical, wetland, turf, occupation, debris, clean clay. Food remains and built surfaces stacked into one mass. Profiles show 16 to 20 basket loads per vertical meter. A wall or construction feature made of cut sod blocks rose about 2.5 meters. An upright bald cypress post stood with limestone slabs around it, 16 meters above the pre-mound ground. The stone had to be carried from outside the floodplain. Alternating coarse and fine layers have been interpreted as internal drainage. Whether every interpretation survives future testing, the physical facts show planning at multiple scales, selected soils repeated. Loads, engineer faces, imported stone, old timber, formal entrances, and continuing responses to water and slope failure. Reuse is not a secondary chapter. It is built into the mound's life. Summit buildings were razed, stripped, and replaced. The first terrace came later than the mound core and held repeated burned floors and rebuilt structures. The dog pit cut features already present and was then covered by later construction. Centuries later, the French mission and an indigenous dwelling occupied the first terrace. Modern repairs cut new faces through old fills and exposed sod blocks, post stone, artifacts, and buried surfaces. Whatever date is ultimately assigned to the first monument, Monk's Mound is a record of inheritance rebuilding, cutting, capping, failure, and repair. The evidence now supports two very different timelines. The established model begins with a laid woodland surface around the late 9th century. A.D. starts mound. Construction around 950 concentrates major building in the 11th and 12th centuries and places the dog in the 13th century sequence. The archaic monument hypothesis begins with a complete mound around 3500 B.C. places the dog around 2000 B.C. and reads later woodland and Mississippian features as reuse cut into a monument thousands of years old. The regional archaic dates show that such populations existed. They do not yet tie that early timeline directly to mound fabric. The issue is testable. First, obtain a new EMS determination from surviving feature 50 bone with full collagen quality. Data and independent replication. Second, locate Parmalee's original measurements and compare them not only with Hogg's archaic dogs, but with a modern Mississippian reference series. Third, date secure lower construction surfaces and preserved organic fractions from the mound itself. Fourth, use mineralogy, mensal recording, micromorphology, and geochemical sourcing to separate intentional color, burn dog, wetland borrow, oxidized soil, and repair fill. Those tests could confirm an archaic monument, reject it, or reveal a more complex multi-year construction history. The precedent from the data is therefore powerful, but conditional. The American bottom held widespread formative populations. The dog is a primary burial. Parmalee found an archaic morphological overlap. 2 early radiocarbon outcomes were reported. The mound preserves intentional colors, multiple source soils, and repeated building episodes. But a formal 3,000-year separation has not yet been established because the dog assays are unresolved and the published stratigraphy places later material beneath the burial. The strongest documentary conclusion is not that the question is closed. It is that the decisive material still exists, the hypothesis is falsifiable, and the next test can change the history of Monk's Mound. Monk's Mound, the Archaic Monument Hypothesis. Documentary, Assembly for Barrows Research. The film is based on the supplied combined era narrative, the chronological assembly and narration script, the Consolidated Evidence Bucket Edition, selected pages from Richard Yerkes and Cheryl Clausen's study of archaic dog ritual. Claims are labeled as established, supported, unresolved, conditional, or hypothesis so that interpretation remains answerable to the record.